Last week, Roshanda Jackson stood in the atrium of City Hall and shared her story in the same place she goes to work every single day. In addition to being the executive assistant to City Councilmember Reggie Gaffney Jr., she's also a sexual assault survivor and advocate. Roshanda, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We're also joined by prosecutor Adair Newman, longtime director of the Special Victims Unit and now Chief Assistant State Attorney. Nice to have you on.
Thank you so much.
Roshanda, when you spoke last weekend in the atrium of City Hall, you said you were standing there terrified. What made you decide that you wanted to share your story in that setting?
That is a really great question. I believe it was, as I stated that day, the fact that I see so many powerful women who are just taking the world by storm, starting right here in Jacksonville. We have our first female mayor, and she's just as short as me. And and also, but it was the fact that I really like the theme, building connected communities, and what SAM stands for. So it was a terrifying experience for me, but it just felt right this time. I recently turned 51, and it just felt right. The courage to stand before and just to show or speak to women and men to say, you don't have to be that situation. You really can go on through life and become extremely successful. But you do need that community to help you get there.
And you've been at that event before and heard others speak.
I've been there before, heard others speak, and couldn't imagine standing up there and just sharing and I don't want to say exposing. Exposing sounds like a bad word, but showing yourself and being there and saying, this is what happened to me, which is often covered with shame. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want to be there. You don't want people to know that this is something that you experience.
And it is a really difficult story. Are you comfortable talking about it a little bit here?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I am.
So you were 23?
I was 23 years old, and I was snatched out of my car, literally through the windshield, not the windshield, the sunroof, snatched through there, and grabbed, blindfolded, and hogtied. I was in a house that was covered with black plastic bags, and I was able to see that after he untied me and after the blindfold was removed so that he can begin to assault me and do whatever he wanted to do. It was not a, and I know this sounds horrible, but it was not a fun moment for me. It wasn't anything that was enjoyable to me, but he received and I guess the power that he felt in capturing me like that and making sure that no one else had an opportunity to be with me. This was someone that I dated, and I end up ending the relationship with him. And because of that, because I didn't want to, that was his way of making sure that no one else had an opportunity to be with me, and that if he couldn't have me, then no one would. But it was, I knew that I was going to lose my life that day. I was operating in survival mode. And when I did, how he was caught, and is an extremely long story that I know we don't have time for, but I was able to get to a hospital. He took me there because I lied about something to him to persuade him. I was completely in survival mode. And when we got to the hospital and they took me to the back, I said to the nurse practitioner, whoever it was that was checking me out, I said, I'm the girl in the photo. I said, I'm her. I said, I need you. I said, we need to get this guy caught. He's here. He's in the waiting room. So the doctors there, the nurse, they all played a part in capturing him. And when they caught him, when they arrested him in the hospital, the most terrifying moment that I had was I had to look at him and identify that they had the right guy. And they had him in handcuffs. And I stuck my head around the corner and I said, that's him. And when we went to court, the first time we didn't win. We didn't win. And we didn't win because at that time when you were dating someone or had been in a relationship with someone, it was difficult for the law, the attorneys to tell your story and to separate that you didn't do something. It was hard for, if you were a woman in a relationship, to say, I've been abused, I've been raped, and I need help. It was hard for whatever reason, for that to differentiate that we're not playing games here. So the first time we lost. And so my attorney said, we're going to do this again. Are you up for it? And I said, yeah. So we did it again. But this time I was in the seat. It was a jury. It was not the greatest experience because I didn't know how bad it was until I saw all those huge pictures. I didn't know that he had a 4x4 foot grave lined with black plastic bag lying there for me to put my body after he killed me. I didn't know that. I found that out in court.
And you saw for the first time the scenes of the crime.
I saw the scenes of the crime. And it was, I think that just, I don't want to say it traumatized me even more, but it showed me that how bad it was. I saw the pictures where, and the officers described that I'm from Mississippi, so in probably here in Florida, and to our listeners, you know that when you kill an animal and how much blood, they reference that it looked like a pig pen or a pig had been slaughtered in there. That's how much blood I lost, and that was smeared on the walls and on the floors, and what I looked like, the pictures that they took of me, and I had to share that story in front of strangers. I had to relive that moment looking at those pictures, and it wasn't the funnest experience, but I knew that it had to be done. I knew that I had to put this guy behind bars because he told me he was going to finish his job, and that was the most terrifying experience because I thought he could get a loose end.
Adair Newman, you hear stories like Roshanda's all too often, really all the time. How do you process that? How do you manage the trauma of just hearing about those kinds of events?
Well, interestingly, we were talking about this before we came in, that, yes, I do hear horrible stories every day, but like listening to Roshanda this morning, I also hear amazing stories of accomplishments of survivors claiming back, their strength. And just when you see that, even if it's once a year, but, if we see that every day, it makes the job so worthwhile. And it's the whole reason why we continue doing what we do.
And I can see that would be gratifying when you're seeing it from the other side. But when you're actually, in trial or taking depositions, your clients depend on you to represent that case. I mean, they're not your clients, I guess.
The state of Florida.
State is your client, but
we advocate for the victims, obviously.
Sure. How do you manage it when you're actually in the moment in court?
It is very difficult to separate out because there's a lot of emotion, and obviously you're in the trial because you believe in the victim and you believe that this person needs to be held accountable. So the stress of knowing that, if you're not successful, that predator will be released and probably in all likelihood do it again. It becomes overwhelming. You just need to learn to kind of separate. And, when you're out of the trial and you're out of the courtroom, go home and take a moment. But when you're in trial, the weeks of trial, it's almost impossible not to feel that emotion and strain.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Roshanda Jackson. She's a sexual assault survivor, and Adair Newman, longtime prosecutor with the Special Victims Unit at the State Attorney's Office. We welcome your calls and questions. You can reach out on social media. You can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can call us at 904-549-2937. Adair, these are difficult cases to win, and the dispute that Roshanda noted is often, was it consensual? Because very often there's evidence of a sexual encounter, not all the time, but how do you tell a client, how do you approach a client to explain that that's kind of the circumstance that they're going to be facing?
At the beginning of every case, we meet in person if the survivors are capable of coming down to meet with us and, discuss the difficulties in going forward. Discuss that, as Roshanda was saying, sitting in the witness stand is incredibly difficult. And I go over those factors with each survivor on every case and just sort of make sure that they understand if we're going to go forward. This is going to be difficult, but we will be with them at every step. And our ultimate goal is justice. And if they're willing to, take that risk, then we are obviously willing to do everything we can to make sure that they get justice.
And how deep do you get into walking through what they might be facing? I mean, it's the job of a defense attorney to vigorously defend their clients, and they will do so by making a victim look unreliable or motivated by something other than justice. And, how deep do you get into explaining what about their conduct that day might play into the questioning that they get or the choices that they made or whether or not they reported timely?
I mean, it's a difficult conversation to have, but you do have to get very deep into it because they need to know what and have realistic expectations of what could happen when they're sitting in deposition and when they're in trial. And like you said, there are only two defenses in a sexual assault case. Either that defendant will say that they aren't the person who did it, or they will say it was consensual. And the consensual route is 90% of what we see in terms of a defense, and it does turn into an attack on the victim. So the victim needs to know that and be aware, and I would say that's usually about an hour-long conversation.
Mm-hmm. Roshanda, you said that being in that courtroom and seeing some of the evidence for the first time, or at least seeing it presented in that way, was in a way re-traumatizing. How prepared were you for the cross-examination that you underwent, and how did you put up with it?
I got frustrated while I was in the witness stand, but my attorney did prepare me. What I wasn't prepared for was the way his attorney was trying to make a liar out of me. That was her whole angle. Her entire angle was to make a liar out of me. And I end up getting frustrated while on trial. But if it wasn't for my attorney letting me know that they are going to paint the picture as if it was consensual, they are going to make you out the liar. And which is something that a victim, when you need someone to believe in you, you need someone to stand there for you, you need someone to be your voice because you don't know where it's at. You're so weak, you're so confused, there's so many emotions, you don't know the law, you don't know where the line is drawn, where it's a violation against you, with you, but you don't know in the law, in the courts. And to have an expert who sit down and they prepare you and they prepare you how the other side is going to paint you, it was knowledge that I needed to know. But when I got on the witness stand, it was a completely mind-blowing experience for me because I got so frustrated that I said to his attorney, "Do you have a daughter? I hope you don't. I hope not, because when she comes to you and tells you that she's been raped, that she's been kidnapped, that something happened to her, I hope that you believe her." And it stunned her that I said that. And I meant it because but that was her job, was to try to make him look good. And I did not appreciate that, because what happened to me, and then seeing the crime scene in these huge window-sized pictures, it just, I believe that I was cracking on stage, not on stage, but in the witness stand. I just believe that that was me. That was my life. That's what happened to me. And it was almost as if this story was being painted, but someone else was telling it, and there was pictures there to show what took place. But we won. And he was sentenced to 25 to 30 years. But we won.
Adair, you filed, I think you said like 180 felony sex crimes last year, the office did?
Yes, approximately.
So give us a sense as to, I mean, that's a lot, and that's a lot of cases. Can you give us some idea of how many you aren't able to file? Because there are difficult circumstances that prevent a case from being really, plausibly prosecuted, no matter what a victim wants.
I can't give you exact statistics on that, but I can tell you that, as you're saying, that is the number one situation or conversation we have to have with a victim, saying, I don't know that we have enough to go forward. Not that this didn't happen, not that we don't 100% believe you that this happened, but when we're looking at these cases, they're so different from the normal criminal case. If you have an armed robbery, that's going to happen in public. It's going to happen, at a convenience store. There's going to be witnesses. There's going to be a video recording of that. That doesn't happen in sexual assault cases. Their circumstances are entirely different. There's not going to be a video recording. No one is going to commit this type of crime in public. And we have so many misconceptions and myths that we have to get over for a successful prosecution. Kind of as Roshanda was saying, one of the number one things is people have this idea in their head that, a sexual assault is some woman running on the street and a stranger who comes and takes her in and commits the assault. Well, the reality is that the majority of sexual assaults, are committed by people who the victims and survivors already know. So kind of getting the jury over that, getting over those misconceptions, and then dealing with the reality that there is not going to be a lot of evidence outside from the victim's testimony. Those are all things that we have to sit down and have a conversation with, and it does lead to us not being able to file a lot of charges.
How do you think we're doing in terms of coming along to a newer understanding of how victims respond in a situation like that? I think as you both have said, I mean, being in a relationship for a long time almost obviated the idea of rape, but there are other things that have, we've learned more about victim response, victims who maybe, don't quite act how we think a victim should act, or they don't say no in the moment, or, there are a lot of things that we've learned more about why those things happen. Mm-hmm. How do you think juries do, and how do you think the general public does in terms of having a better understanding of what constitutes sexual assault?
I can say, having practiced for 20 years, that there has been a significant shift in an evolution across the board in terms of reaction to sexual assaults. Also, from a law enforcement perspective, 20 years ago, you wouldn't hear the term victim-centered approach, but that is the standard now, and there's training on how to interview in a victim-centered approach that kind of addresses what you're saying, that the understanding that that person has just endured trauma, and when you're interviewing them, they may not be giving you the story in a chronological order, but that's not because they're not telling you the truth. It's because they've just endured trauma, and that's how the brain reacts to that. So things like victim-centered approach and that training for interviews has changed, which then changes our ability to successfully prosecute it. And back to what you were originally asking, changes our ability to present it to the jury in a different way, to let them understand that, this is the reaction, and it may not be the reaction you expect, but here's the reason behind it and even the science behind it. And I found, as the years have gone on, jurors are receptive to that, and they will listen as long as you have the tools to explain it to them.
Someone else who spoke at the event last week was someone who had survived sex trafficking, and I think our belief and our thinking on that has also changed a lot over time. There was a time when women who were sex trafficked, viewed as prostitutes, essentially were prosecuted, most often if they were in that circumstance. And now we really have a different look at, them being victims, and often, their drug addictions or their alcohol addictions being used to kind of manipulate or control them. So has that increased the number of prosecutions that you do overall, now that it includes a universe of people that we probably didn't once prosecute on behalf of?
Yes, I would think it definitely has increased that. I would say we've seen this a lot in more a broader picture with our cold case unit, our sexual assault kit initiative unit, where we look back and we've kind of learned the lesson over time of the mistakes that may have been made, where we got all these DNA hits, for example, and we see a history where we have one perpetrator who has a hit to maybe 7 or 8 cases, and perhaps those victims 20 years ago weren't heard because a lot of them maybe did have substance abuse or, had a history of prostitution. But then when you look at that picture 20 years later and you see that there were 7 victims of the same individual, it kind of informs the situation and shows, today that is not how we would have necessarily responded, but definitely proves the point that these cases can be made and these things are happening to the most vulnerable people in our community.
Roshanda, when you were speaking, you introduced yourself in a variety of ways. You kind of told us who you were. You're a mother, you're a sister, you're a grandmother, even though you don't look like it.
Thank you.
Why was it important for you to kind of identify who you are to people and in so many different respects?
It was important to me to do that because we never know. There are some powerful women who has experienced some traumatic events, and there are women who is on a journey to becoming successful, and they need to hear that who I am now, me being a mother, me being a daughter, a sister, a grandmother, a mentor to thousands of women, a friend, that this is who I am, and this is what I've been able to accomplish since that traumatic moment in my life, when I was 23 years old. It was important to me to share with them just the overcoming, the resiliency, the importance of having advocacies on your behalf and what it looks like. Having the power to speak up and then to have a team of individuals around you to support you and to hold up your arms while you're speaking, that matures into you becoming and accomplishing the goals that you want to accomplish. And it's difficult because at that time when you experiencing it or you just come out of it, you don't see yourself as successful in anything. You don't see that you're going to be successful in anything. You see yourself as, oh my God, I just put somebody in prison. Oh my God, all of the negative things. Oh, I just, they may look at me differently. Oh, now they know my business. Oh my gosh, I made this. They're going to think I made the worst decision and it's me. I'm a bad decision maker. And all of those myths that comes along with those internal myths that comes along with you being a victim, you being traumatized. It doesn't, and knowing that to share with these women and men that that decision that you made or didn't make, or that situation that happened to you doesn't have to be your story. That's not your right now. Who you are now is you have the power to write your own story and what that looks like. And you can do that. And I wanted to share that to show this is what it looks like. Yes, this happened to me. Yes, I overcame that. Yes, I went through that. But let's look at who you can become after that. It was really important that I shared, that they are not there right now. That moment that they are experiencing, even if anybody that is listening that is experiencing something, that doesn't define you. That doesn't say this is who you're going to be and how you have to live the rest of your life. You can actually overcome it and become successful.
Well, you really are an inspiration. So thank
Thank
you
you.
for sharing your story. Have you gotten good feedback after your
I
appearance last week?
have,
Hmm.
I have. It's there were, I think the most moving thing that happened was immediately after I spoke on last week. There were men and women who walked up to me in tears and shared that they too had been victims of sexual assault, and that my story and seeing me, and they see me every day, whether they come in across the street or I'm going across the street, they see me every day and never knew that I experienced this. And then to see who I am now and to say I went through something like that, it did something for them. And it is my prayer that it remove the same barrier that was trying to keep me back, that it removes that for them, and they have the opportunity to share their story, even if it's in counseling, as we spoke earlier, even if it's just through releasing and relieving yourself, and to say, I can, wow, I can do whatever it is that I want to do. I can, it literally, the sky is the limit. And I absolutely refuse to give that guy, that piece of trash, any more power over me in speaking, but also in accomplishing everything that I set my mind out to.
Adair, I want to talk a little bit about an issue that was not something that involved Roshanda's experience, and that's the issue of child victims. Those are particularly difficult cases in terms of, family members who don't want their child to experience what someone like Roshanda experienced, having to take the witness stand, have their credibility challenged, or even just go through that process. Um, how often does that reluctance require you to maybe not prosecute a case? And do you ever take a case to trial if a victim doesn't want you to?
So, children, yeah, it's extremely difficult when we have to deal with the reality of putting a child on the witness stand. The Constitution has a confrontation clause, a right to confront. So, the
For a
majority
defendant to
for a
confront their
defendant,
accuser, yeah.
yeah. So, the majority of the times we have to have the conversation that the child will have to testify in person with the offender in the courtroom, which, as any parents would agree, is very disturbing and very difficult decision to have to kind of contemplate. Um, it, I would say that a lot of times it does lead to the decision to enter into plea negotiations because it's just not worth the possible risk or trauma to the child to do that. The legislature has given us some other avenues to try to not have the child testify in person. But at the end of the day, if you're going forward to a jury trial, it's very important for the jurors to see and hear the individual who is talking about what happened to them. So it does lead to a lot of conversations about plea negotiations, and it does oftentimes lead to us taking maybe a sentence that may not be the highest that we could get, but it's sort of focusing on the best interest of the child.
And often, those pleas will result in something that isn't necessarily categorized as a sex crime, right? Somebody might be willing to plead to an aggravated child abuse or a child abuse charge, meaning they don't go on the sex offender registry. So there isn't any kind of public reckoning that this person might be a threat to others.
That does happen from time to time. And again, it's usually the result of a conversation that we've had with the parents where we've weighed, the risks and the outcome, and the parent has made the decision that, that is in the best interest of their child.
Yeah. And I guess that's got to be difficult as a prosecutor because you know that that person could possibly reoffend.
It's very difficult.
Yeah. What is it like, though, to see someone like Roshanda kind of be able to be a spokesperson for victims in this way? And kind of get to the stage that she's at where she's able to help other people, kind of inspire them through her story.
That's amazing. I was there when she gave her story, and she was truly inspirational. And I was telling her earlier, and I truly do believe this, when a survivor is able to get up and give that account, you have no idea how many people you are potentially reaching that have remained silent. Whether it inspired one person to report, one person to, tell a family member that may lead to that family member being more protective, or one person to get to counseling so that they can start getting themselves on the right path. I mean, that is an amazing accomplishment, and it's so important for the community to have survivors that are willing to speak up like she was.
Roshanda, any final thoughts you have about your experience last week or going forward?
I just want to emphasize more advocacy and community, and having I want women and men who have experienced this and who hasn't spoke about it to know that there is help out there, and there is opportunity to become greater than that particular situation. And I just want to encourage them to reach out, to speak to someone that they can trust, to help them get the help that they need.
And we should say, if you are in need of help or if you've suffered sexual assault, there are resources. You can call the 24-hour rape crisis hotline that's run by the Women's Center. That number is 904-721-7273. You can also call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 800-656-HOPE. Adair Newman, Roshanda Jackson, thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.